Joining us from Red Wave Investments, Mark Smith, to take a look inside everybody's portfolio and see how. We were talking before. Rob and I were talking about Cyprus and their call to have Russia either bail them out or take them over as a protectorate. I've seen kind of the play of this story go both ways. What's the latest you hear from the Cyprian banks?
Well, it's interesting, and I heard you guys talking about the different options that they were considering, and there was actually just a headline that came across an hour or so ago about how if Russia wanted to try to securitize some of these natural gas revenues, that Turkey might have an issue with them doing that based upon where this natural gas is coming from in the Mediterranean Ocean, and so there are some interesting geopolitical things that seem to be popping up as a result of this. But what I think is really interesting with the markets, and today was a day that saw, I guess, again, rising concern about what's going to happen with Cyprus, as well as kind of some negative earnings news that we haven't seen a ton of lately, but we saw some negative earnings come out yesterday from Federal Express, and late in the day after the close today, Oracle came out with negative numbers. And so there was quite a bit of negative data, both on the earnings side and what that meant for global growth, but also what it meant for Cyprus. And I think Cyprus, as I've thought about this throughout the day, I'm starting to think that the EU almost wants to see what will happen if a country is forced to leave the euro, right? And they were very concerned about doing this with Greece because it was a significantly larger country and a significantly larger piece of the overall European economy. But Cyprus, being as small as it is, it's almost like they could use this as a test case just to see what happens if somebody does have to forcefully or in a very unplanned and uncoordinated way leave the euro. And I say this because, you look at today, the ECB came out and they said, we're only going to support Cyprus until Monday. And if you don't have a plan, we're done, which basically means Cyprus is done and they're leaving the euro. So,
this is something that I've been reading, which is that, the big shock here is that the big European powers had said, we're going to support the euro everywhere. And it's clear that they don't really mean it. That they're
I don't think they
here.
can either, Mark. They don't have the money to anymore, do they?
But what's interesting about this, right, is we're talking about, and not to trivialize $15 or $20 billion, but we're talking about the overall eurozone has a GDP of probably $16-17 trillion, and we're talking about maybe $20 billion to save Cyprus. And the EU and the ECB say we'll put up 10, but you got to come up with the other. The difference, which is where this whole deposit tax came in,
right,
or
and
the pension fund. So the amount of money we're talking about, even though Europe is broke, Germany can still borrow money, and I know you guys were having an interesting conversation about, while Germany's saying, well, we don't want to bail out Russian depositors, which is probably very well true, but we're just not talking about a large amount of money that needs to be put in here, which is why I'm starting to think they're very comfortable saying, well, let's roll the dice and just see what happens if a country has to exit the euro on less than desirable terms.
Yes, if you ever felt like you were a mouse in a maze, guess what? You're right. You are now an economic petri dish. Well, the Dow took a 90-point hit on that. S&P is down. The Nasdaq was down 30. It's impacting us here, isn't it?
Well, and like I was saying, it's definitely impacting us. One, because it's reminding people of all the problems that are going on in Europe. And two, we have had some negative earnings numbers. Now, it'll be interesting to see what happens tomorrow, because there's kind of been this theme over the last few weeks that people keep talking about, when there's a dip or when there's a correction, we're going to go in and buy. And that's almost, it's almost kind of prevented there to be any kind of correction, because as soon as something drops 2 or 3%, people are stepping in trying to buy the dip. But we did have negative earnings from Oracle today, or they came out yesterday evening, but that suggested there were significant slowdowns in the global economy. FedEx said as much. They said they're significantly reducing capacity to the Asian markets because they're not filling enough planes. And yet today, after the close, we see Nike come out with fantastic earnings, and the stock is up quite a bit on the news and after-hours trading. And so, we could have some more positive sentiment heading into tomorrow just on this earnings thing. But overall, everything today was between Cyprus and some negative earnings numbers. it had people kind of thinking maybe maybe move a little money to the sidelines.
Well, right after the Dow closed, the House passed the Senate's version of the House spending bill that will keep the government from shutting down until October. So that's going to the president, so maybe that'll help. It's interesting, though, that the tech sector is the one. Are we seeing a leveling off in our last moments here of the tech sector because we've sort of innovated as much as we can for now, and until something new comes along, we're not going to see any big spikes in the tech sector?
I don't know if I would say it's that. I mean, again, Oracle is kind of one company, but it's a major contributor to the NASDAQ and the S&P. And because it had bad numbers, it kind of pulled Cisco down, which is a big Dow component. And so I think that there are changes in the technology sector, right? And one of the big problems that people have seen with Oracle, and I don't know if it's a real problem, but one of the negatives people talk about is that so much stuff shifts to cloud-based everything. Maybe Oracle's technology, and even though they proclaim to be a leader in the cloud sector, maybe there'll be someone who suffers a little bit from this. I definitely don't think that we've seen a leveling off in technological development. But like technology tends to do, we could be seeing a shifting in who the winners are in the sector, going forward.
Mark at redwaveinvestments.com. That's MARC, redwaveinvestments.com. Thank you, Mark. We'll talk to you again tomorrow.
Thanks, guys. Have a good